Hi everyone, I'm Caroline from the Writing Development Centre and welcome to a cuppa and a catch up. As you can see, I'm here with my friend and yours. It's Nikki Gardner. Hi Nikki.
Hi Caroline, how you doing?
I'm not bad. I'm not bad at all. I've got my cuppa here and I'm ready to,
Same,
yeah,
ready to go.
champion. Excellent. So these videos are just a chance for us to sit down and have a cuppa and a catch up with you and talk about a timely topic that's coming up quite a lot in our one-to-one practice. And the topic that we're going to be discussing today is feedback, namely what to
hmm
do with it, how to process it, how to make sense of it, and how to use it in order to develop your work. So I think this is a particularly timely one. It's definitely something that we're seeing a lot of in one-to-ones at the moment, isn't it? As
Absolutely,
yeah,
yeah. I'd,
uh,
I'd say about 2/3 at least
yeah,
will be about dealing with feedback at
yeah.
the moment.
So as we see the feedback coming in, being processed from semester one, and students really thinking about, okay, how can I use this and make sense of it
Mm,
in order to apply it to the assignments that are going to come up in semester two. And I
hmm
think this is a really universal topic, so I hope everyone gets something out of our chat today. I think even if, you know, it's not necessarily a case of we need to really get the grips of the feedback if it only if we're being disappointed with the mark. It's sometimes if we've done well and we want to know, like, okay, but why did I do well and how can I replicate it? Then really sort of looking at what the feedback's telling you about markers' expectations is
hmm
really useful. So, like I said, wherever you are and whatever feedback that you have, I hope you get something out of the chat today. So, in the last Cuppa and a Catch Up back in December, um, we were talking about all things time management. And if you watched that video, and I hope you did, um, you might have heard us talking about the 4Ds. But today, when it comes to feedback, we're going to talk about the 3Ds, three different Ds. All steps to take to help us make sense of and implement feedback. So, without further ado, the first D stands for
Distancing. See how
distance.
flawless that was.
Was
So
just
yeah, that's
seamless.
so yeah. It is a coincidence that these are just D's, by the way. We're not obsessed for some reason.
No.
But I think the reason distancing can be really important is that um, as much as we might try and pretend otherwise, getting feedback can be a really emotional experience. And that can range from being absolutely devastating, I know I've experienced that, to, elating. And regardless of where that emotion kind of falls, that kind of emotive aspect of it can often kind of cloud our objectivity when it comes to dealing with the
Yeah.
comments. So it's useful to try and give yourself a bit of space and time to get used to the marks and to get used to the emotions that might accompany those marks and get a nice kind of a feel for it before looking at the comments. When I was studying, I was often told to look at the comments before looking at the marks so it doesn't get clouded. Now I don't know about you, but I never had the self control to do that.
I don't think anybody does
No.
that.
And so I was just kind of going looking through the comments by row, kind of going, come on, I want to see the mark. So a more realistic approach, I think, is have a look at the mark and then give yourself a couple of days or however long you think it takes to feel a bit more comfortable, and then start looking at the comments afterwards.
Yeah. I would say I would echo that definitely. Nobody's not going to look at the mark. Fair.
Yeah.
Unless you're incredibly disciplined, in which case, all power to you.
I've never met anyone that's done that either. I think it's very optimistic advice.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I would say sort of I think I do talk to a lot of students who do just sort of look at the mark and leave it there, and
Mm,
it is, I think, like you said, that impulse to kind of, that need to sort of, yeah, do what you need to do and give yourself a little bit of space, but then build in a routine where you do go back
mm,
and look as well. um and I think we've been talking as well about just giving yourself the space to vent if you
yes.
need to kind of just get any sort of emotions around the feedback or the mark off your chest and kind of
Mm,
just process it, but also to kind of not let it fester maybe.
yeah.
So kind of maybe just almost put like a statute of limitations on it. Say, right, I'm going to have a couple of days just to maybe dwell on this, or either, you know, bask in the elation of getting a really good mark, or just think, oh, honestly.
And yeah, I think that process of venting is just, it can be a lot more productive than trying to kind of repress the emotions or trying to kind of pretend that they're not there. And so that might be the form of, you know, having a chat with someone else, going, you know what, I'm really confused about this, or I really don't really like this, and, or writing it down somewhere. Just, you know, kind of, it can be quite cathartic to express that in some way, but it can also be a really useful kind of original source of thinking about how to move forward, because sometimes within those kind of concerns or difficulties, there might be a nugget of something you can use. So from, you know, personal experience, I remember getting some feedback that was saying, you know, oh, you need to talk about this thing, and I did talk about it a couple of paragraphs down or a couple of pages later, and my venting there was, be patient, I'm going to get to it, you know, kind of go, you know, what's your issue? Now what I found out subsequently, though, is that in there is something that I could have done differently, which is to signpost forward earlier on. And so within that venting, often there's actually a kernel there of something that we can use to move forward.
And I think what you're seeing there is just that process of you developing, isn't it? From, but I did do that, or, you know, but, you know, hold your horses, and then actually saying, once you're starting to cool down, oh, I can get the point. And that's what we're going to come to. I think that distancing, as you sort of come out of that first phase, is you're starting to kind of see your work maybe with different eyes. And I think that's what we're going to come to in the next stage. So I think you've hit on something really important there, that actually, as that process of venting sort of gets things out of your system, you start to get a sort of clearer view of, okay.
Absolutely, yes.
But it's everyone's natural instinct, I think, when you get a bit of like critique or criticism, to go, I beg your pardon, or sort of bristle. I think you have to be a saint to go, oh, lovely, thank you for making this comment on something that I've tried so hard on.
Or it could go the other way, you know, if you've got like some really great mark and you're really pleased with it, and then you see something that worked to improve, you might well think, and I've also done this in the past, I'm going, well, doesn't matter, I still got that mark, when actually, well, you know, there's still stuff that we can work on there. So it does swing both ways. But I think you're absolutely right. Giving yourself a space to vent does allow you to cool down rather than fester, I think the word you used was, and I think that's absolutely spot on.
The other thing, before we move on to the second of our 3Ds, is I think we wanted to touch on the fact that, now neither of us want to be glib here and kind of say, don't take it personally. But there is that kind of need to separate yourself from your work, isn't there? And I think you particularly had something that you wanted to say around that, didn't you?
Well, yeah, it is one of those things where it's very easy to say and very difficult to do. And I don't want to pretend that this is we're ever going to get to a point where I am totally distanced from your work, and it's an unrealistic expectation. But there is something to be mindful of there. One thing that I found very useful, it doesn't do the entire job, but it can be useful, is paying attention to your inner kind of voice or inner dialogue, and changing from I statements to my statements. And by that, I mean, if you catch yourself saying something like, I don't use evidence well, or I can't plan properly, changing them to my statements, you know, my essay didn't use evidence well, or my process doesn't help me plan effectively. So that I to my, it's a reframing. And I think, and it's also not as easy as that. I don't want to pretend this is an easy thing to do. It takes constant attention. But it is something to keep in mind, because it's such a natural response for us to see something like, you know, if someone says this assignment was inadequate, to hear I am inadequate. And it's just something that we do constantly have to battle against consciously, I think.
And I think that awareness, so I love that. I think that's, so that for me, that's often the key to everything, you know, that shift from the internal to the external in a way. It's not you necessarily. And also just being aware that the market, it's like the iceberg effect. The market's just seeing what's on the surface. They're not necessarily, you know, appraised of all the circumstances under which you wrote that essay. they're only able to comment on what they can see. So it is just, you know, a comment on your work and not you. And also, you know, particularly if you did get a bad mark or a mark that you perceive as bad, because that's entirely, you know, subjective. It's not the final verdict on your abilities. You know, you do not have to let that define you. And I know that's kind of, again, everything that is easier said than done, and Nikki and I both are very aware of that. However, I think it's helpful to kind of just train yourself into thinking that was that essay, that was that mark, and now you've got that experience under your belt, and you've learned from that, and you're already more experienced than you were when you wrote that. You've already moved on, and it's kind of, again, that statute of limitations of sometimes. The first thing I do when a student hasn't a one-to-one with me and they've had a mark that they've been disappointed by is like within the first 10 to 15 minutes, we're like, can we just put that in the bin now? Can we just move past that and start thinking about the assignments to come?
Yeah.
We've taken everything we need from that now, and let's just not think about it.
We could spend so much time kind of dissecting previous assignments and seeing all the myriad things that may have happened there, but if we're not using that to go forward, it's a bit of it can be a bit of a waste of time.
Just a negative spiral. Isn't it? So to sum all that up, give yourself some time to distance, but maybe start then putting the brakes on and start sort of setting yourself some maybe almost like tiny little deadlines of, you know what, I'm going to have 2 days to sulk, or I'm going to have a couple of days to celebrate, and then I'm going to start seeing what I can learn from this, which brings us to
decoding.
Second D.
Decoding. Sorry, jump the gun there.
No, it's all right. You were just so excited about it.
Well excited about decoding.
Decoding, I think, is just like, it sounds almost like there's a Bletchley Park ring to it. I just feel like we're into some kind of exciting espionage type stuff here.
Very grandiose idea of what feedback is, but you know, I like it.
Hey, decoding. So we distance and then we decode. What does decode mean, Nikki?
It basically means kind of interpreting the feedback that we're given into language that we can understand and something we can work with. Because, you know, the ideal, of course, is that, you know, feedback is entirely self-explanatory and clear, and we know exactly what to do with it. The reality of that is not always, you know, spot on. And, you know, sometimes there is a slight mismatch of language then, that the language used by the person giving feedback isn't always so obviously understood by the person receiving the feedback. And that's, you know, because communication is difficult. Communication through writing is also difficult, as we know in the Writing Development Centre. So things can get lost in translation.
I think there's another thing there of almost like it's a language that isn't always, like you said, isn't always completely familiar to us. It's almost like learning a second language, isn't it? That the mark is obviously very fluent in this, and we as students coming up might not be yet. So that's where I think that the need to almost translate it into something that you do understand it is crucial, because you might not necessarily be fluent in that language yet, which is absolutely fine.
Absolutely, and that chimes into something I often say. If working, you know, with students who aren't native English speakers, one of the first things we say is, well, no one speaks academic English as a first language. So we are having to kind of to learn what these phrases mean in this context. So, you know, one very common one that often comes up is, you know, say, well, this is a bit too descriptive. That's often one that can cause confusion, and you know, you might see it and go, okay, what's wrong with description? Don't I need to describe this information in order to talk about it?
Do stuff with it,
And that is the case when we think of what descriptive means generally. But within the context of the language of marking and feedback, what that usually indicates is actually something about, you know, a balance between description and argument. That perhaps there's just a bit too much description. Sure, we want a bit, but we're spending a bit too much time describing what other people are saying and not enough time speaking ourselves.
Yes.
And that's an example of how the language that's quite on the surface might seem self-explanatory. It hides certain presumptions. Perhaps.
Yeah. And I also, and I think there's something there about actually using your feedback to give you an insight into what markers expect. So for instance, I had an example as well, and I had to write it down because I'm old now. Just don't jump in too quickly and deny that I'm not.
I realised after like a slight beat, I realised I've missed my chance now. I can't.
It'll be too late. It's fine. Let's move on. No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm not. So yeah, again around the decoding. It's what insights do the comments provide you, and again, I think that distancing really helps there. If you think about it more widely than just this essay, what's it telling you more widely about markers' expectations in your subject and at your current level of study? For instance, if a marker's saying, I would like to have seen you developing some of these points further, it doesn't just mean, I would really have enjoyed that, it would have made
Yeah.
It means actually depth is being prioritized over breadth there. It's kind of saying, at this level, kind of wanting you to cover fewer points, but mind them as deeply as you can and be more critical. So you're kind of getting a sense there of, okay, they're not just saying they would have liked that, but there's just something a little bit broader, a little bit wider, a little bit more illuminating and insightful about what markers expect you to do at the level you're at.
Yeah, it's going back to that thing that you said before. It's about mining it for clues, really. Thinking about, what kind of things might be implied within that suggestion.
Yeah,
sometimes that could be a useful exercise.
I like that you said mining it for clues, because I think it is a bit like doing a Sherlock Holmes job. And it does take time this as well. So I think one of the things that you do as you get more experience as a student is you are looking for patterns. You're looking for almost building up your writing profile. What you tend to get, comments that you do well and you might not need to worry about. And what kind of things do come up, frequently. So it's like getting as much feedback as you've got, getting it all together, getting a highlighter and seeing how many times the same thing comes up. Sometimes some things are like very just exclusive to one assignment.
Yeah.
So there might be, I think we've all had an assignment where we just thought there was no chance we're ever going to do well on because didn't understand the topic, didn't understand the question, missed half the lectures or whatever. And it was always going to be a struggle. And some things are just like a one-off.
Yeah.
But are there any sort of general points you can take?
And I also think it's just a really pragmatic approach as well, because, depending on how much feedback you get, you might just have lots of different points and you might not have the mental space or the physical time to address each of these points, especially if you're looking at feedback from multiple assignments. So just kind of having a look at the most common themes can just be a more pragmatic and effective way of figuring out where you're going to allocate your time. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in our last Cuppa and Catch Up about being realistic about prioritizing what exactly it is you want to work on.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if we're straight into the next of the D's here, but we'll say it anyway. I think again around that prioritizing, it's sometimes what happens is, and I think it's again a natural instinct to maybe gravitate towards something that's easier to fix. So if you get comments about, your referencing needs a little bit of work or style needs a little bit of work, that's easier than structure was slightly chaotic here or it's be more critical. But it will have made less of a difference to the mark. So in terms of prioritizing, it's making sure you're not getting sucked into something that actually might make some difference, but is more of a surface feature. I would say the big two are always, structure and argumentation together as a block, and then criticality. If you're getting comments around there, then I think that's where to focus.
And it also, a way of kind of just reinforcing that is if you have a look at the marking rubrics that are often attached to assignments, they will usually lay this out. They will say, that you're going to get a certain amount of marks allocated. And what those tend to show in most cases is that, just like Caroline said, it's the criticality, it's the argument, it's the structure, Those are where the big chunks are coming in terms of, is it all referenced 100% correctly? A couple of marks, but it's not really comparative. Also, another one that tends to be a surface feature that we kind of grab onto is often grammar and how sophisticated is the writing.
Yeah.
That also tends to be kind of one of those vortexes that can suck you in. Whereas there are these other elements that we can look at, and the rubrics tend to reinforce that. Of course, it depends on the assignment, but that's the general pattern that we would expect to see.
I think points for using vortex in a sentence there.
Thanks. I love that word. I don't get to use it enough. I need to.
I think that was a very well. You saw your opportunity and you took it there, and well done. The other thing I think we wanted to talk about, just to round off this section on decoding, was actually, if you are in the process of decoding your feedback and you've still got questions, that you're absolutely well within your right to transform that into a dialogue, aren't you?
Absolutely. And feedback often works, given the nature of feedback, it kind of works a bit better as an ongoing exchange than a one-off exchange. So, you can absolutely get in touch with your, one of your tutors or the marker if you know who it is, and just ask for a little bit of clarification or just for a bit of a discussion around these things. And if you make clear that you're not kind of arguing against the mark, most tutors will be more than happy to have that discussion, because it is a conversation or ongoing dialogue is an easier medium to make sure that these comments are being understood as they mean, because I'm saying language can be ambiguous. That's part of the problem of any kind of writing. And if you find that it's harder to understand it in writing, if possible, you might also want to kind of ask for a video chat or a verbal conversation, because it's a different way of getting that kind of information.
I think the other thing as well is often when things are written down, this is linking back to how we started talking about, distancing. If the kind of feedback's rattled you a little bit, you thought, well, that sounds a bit.
Yes, absolutely.
Talking to someone, when someone says it to you, it's often a little bit softer. It's a little bit, sometimes you think, oh, okay, right, they didn't mean it that way or whatever. And it can kind of just take any tension out of a situation as well if you just sort of talk it through. So I think that's useful there. There was one more thing actually that I had to say, sort of almost but before you have that dialogue with the tutor. It's interesting. Now I say this with no judgment at all, because I didn't do this either, and it just made me realize. I was talking to a student last week, reviewing feedback, and they said, oh, the marker said my argument's inconsistent. And I said, what do you think it is? And so I can't remember. And I thought, yeah. And again, with no judgment, but I thought, that's interesting. You haven't read back through it. And then I thought, I didn't either. I didn't with my work, I didn't want to read back through any of the essays. Like Nicky, I did exactly what Nicky told you not to do at the start of the session, which is just look at the mark. And I'm so over that. I could be a umbrella and I never want to look at it again.
Absolutely. And I think it might be a function of having that distancing as a strategy, as a conscious strategy, knowing that you're going to come back to it later, rather than the very kind of understandable approach of going, okay, I've seen the mark, that's done, I want to move on with my life.
But actually, if you read back through the work once you have the feedback is giving you another lens to view your work through. And actually feeding into what your editing process could be. You're a more experienced student, you're a more experienced writer now than you were when you wrote that. And you've got that feedback of kind of making you, giving you a bit of extra context, giving you more insight into what markers' expectations are. So can you see what the marker's getting at now? And if so, how might that help you develop critical awareness of your work that will help, train those editing muscles? And then I think if you're reading through it and you think, you know what, I can't really see where they're coming from, that's when that dialogue can happen. But I think if you do sort of train yourself, don't do what I did, and sort of do, once you've got that distance, read back through your work in light of the feedback. And I think that's really sort of helping you develop self-criticality, which is what you need.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, in a way, one of the things that feedback does is it's like giving you a pair of kind of goggles that you can look back over your work and see it from a marker's perspective. or closer to a marker's perspective.
Yeah.
So that is a great opportunity, really. I think
that's when you think, okay, and then you start thinking, all right, I can see why I did that. Why did I do that? How can I not do that in the future? What strategies can I develop? Which leads us nicely, I think, into the final of the 3 Ds, which is
the third D is doing something with your feedback.
Yes.
So we've got distancing, we've got decoding, and we've got doing.
Yes.
And that's really just kind of making an active plan, because I think one of the common tendencies is we get some feedback and we kind of go to ourselves, okay, I'll keep that in mind, in that kind of vague way. But when it comes down to doing an academic assignment, there's a lot of other stuff in your mind, so there might not be space to keep it in your mind. Yeah. So planning beforehand exactly how you're going to action that feedback can be a really kind of useful way of ensuring that you are taking forward some kind of different strategy, different approach, some new lessons there.
Yes, and I think as well, think about what insights has the feedback provided you in your writing process. So all issues in the product can be linked back to something in the process, I find. Yes. So for instance, if you structure, you've got comments about the structure. Would changing your approach to planning help you bring that under control? If you get comments like, irrelevant material keeps creeping in, is that something that you could, add into the editing stage, sort of have a check for, is this need to know, is this nice to know, how does this help me answer the question? So it's almost trying to translate that into a strategy that would help you. So I think the step is, okay, what insight does this give me? Adding that to almost like an editing checklist or a feedback checklist, then thinking, what strategy could I bring in? And that is also where we would come in if you wanted to have a chat with us, and we'll let you know how you can do that at the end of the chat. But yeah, I think that's the kind of process around it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That writing is a process, and there are lots of different parts. It includes reading, it includes drafting, it includes planning, and just figuring out what's the most kind of what's the ideal place that we can start putting in some interventions.
Yeah,
it's not always at the very end, which is what we kind of tend to do, I think. It's staging interventions at an opportune moment, I think.
Yeah, it could be that actually what's happened is you've run out of time. You didn't edit your work enough because you didn't have enough time, because you spent so much time reading. It's about streamlining your approach to reading that will help you. So it's not, like you said, it's not just about editing or adding an extra check-in stage at the end. It's about there's all different points within the process that issues could have arisen.
And that's literally a conversation I had yesterday, which was, a student talking about, well, how can I make my editing more efficient? And it's like, well, actually, we don't want to reduce the amount of time editing. It might be that it's the first bit, it's the reading process that we could shave a bit of time, and we won't want to spend a bit more time
actually.
So that kind of process view of what it is to produce an academic assignment can give you a bit more kind of flexibility in terms of where we're staging these interventions. I keep repeating that phrase because I just came up with it and I quite like it. Staging an intervention.
Yes,
I quite like that. I didn't come up with the word. I guess
no, that's in the context of feedback.
Yes.
And I think the final thing that we had for this is sometimes, and especially now, I'm really hearing from a lot of students who are like really feeling like the social isolation of not being able to like bounce ideas around with their peers, and it kind of not kind of, oh, did you get that feedback as well, or maybe we can work together. But if you can sort of work some way of building in peer review, swapping essays with someone that you trust, they might be able to see things that you're too close to see. The other thing as well is if you kind of tell them, so raise their awareness, kind of say, would you check my structure? Or, I've been getting feedback that suggests I don't develop my points enough. What do you think? And then as well, I think what really helps, because I've done this before in the past, what really helps boost your confidence is that you're thinking, because you can't see it in your work, you can't do it. And that's not, you can't see it in your work because it's really hard to see it in your own work because you've written it and you're too close to it. You can see it in someone else's. So you're like, oh, well, I do have that basic awareness and I'm able to do that. And actually that peer review builds your confidence. it gives you some help, but it also boosts your confidence because you're like, oh, I can help someone else too.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, actually, that often if we're having difficulty seeing something in the work, it translates to some kind of, oh, God, I just can't see these issues.
Yeah,
but you're absolutely spot on. It might be closeness.
I don't know what a good structure looks like. I don't know what criticality looks like. You do. It's just really hard to see it.
So,
right.
And so you may find that you do sometimes do a bit of peer review before submitting the assignment. But what people often don't kind of think to do is actually do that afterwards as well with the feedback, because that can still be a good thing to do for the reasons that we've just said. Is that having an outside perspective can make it easier to interpret, and as Caroline just said, it can build up the confidence. I think that's actually a really important point.
Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little framework to apply when you've got some feedback and you want to know, okay, how can I best make use of it? So distance, give yourself some distance, vent, get it off your chest, whatever. We've talked about then decoding, going back through, finding patterns, prioritizing what you might want to work on, and then doing how you would apply that feedback. And like I said, we are running our one-to-one service online at the moment via Zoom. So if you want to head to our website, you can find out more about that. Those appointments last for 50 minutes. Feedback is just one of the many things that we could talk to you about. So do check out our website to get a sense of the full range, and we would love to see you. But for now, thank you very much for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it, and also, like I said, got something out of it in terms of how you would utilize feedback to help you improve your work in the future. All right, so that's everything from us for now. Thank you very much, Nikki, for joining me in this chat this morning.
Oh, thank you as well, and thank you guys for watching. I'm sure it was all right. I'm sure it was all right. I don't want to oversell it.
That is the best. We'll hope you found it all right.
All right.
That's when, while later send or bored, and that you're not going to complain now. All right.
I'm happy with all right.
You know what? We set high standards for ourselves at the WDC. All right. All the best, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.